Hello, this is the Unit 4b and Unit 5 test review, our last for the year. Unit 4 was all about social psychology. So two things here, self-serving bias versus a fundamental attribution error. Self-serving bias says that you're always going to put the blame wherever it is best for yourself. So if the results are good, then you'll say it was an internal disposition, that it was because of me. I studied for this test, so that's why I did well. If it's for a negative result, then you're going to put it on an environmental or external disposition. My teacher didn't teach us that. For fundamental attribution error, it always relates to judging somebody else, and it always puts it on an on an internal disposition. That person was late because they're lazy and they like to sleep too much. That person failed the test because they didn't study. It doesn't consider that they were late because their sibling was sick that morning and they had to help. They could have failed the test because they were at the hospital all night with a family member. So fundamental attribution error always only applies to somebody else and puts it on their internal disposition. The Ash conformity study was the one where the person was told to judge the 3 lines and compare it to the single line. And all the other participants gave the incorrect answer, and they wanted to see if the person in the study would conform and also give the incorrect answer. And the majority of time, they did conform with the wrong answer. Some factors that contributed to that were the size of the group, and if everybody else also gave the wrong answer, if it was unanimous. If at least one other person gave the correct answer, then they would go with the correct answer. The Milgram obedience experiment was the one where there were 2 participants. One was told that they were the teacher. The other one was told that they were the learner. The teacher was being instructed to give shocks to the learner. And in fact, we learned later that the shocks were not real. But the majority of the time, the participant did give the shocks because of their willingness to obey an authority figure. Informational versus social influence versus normative. Informational says if you are in a situation where you don't know what to do, you're going to copy others because you think that they have correct information. So for example, if you're at the DMV getting your driver's license and you don't know where to stand, you're going to go stand where other people are standing because you think they must have the correct information and you want to stand in the correct place. Normative social influence says that you are following social norms because you want to fit in and you don't want to be excluded. So normative social influence says that if everybody at school starts folding their pants at the bottom on Fridays, well, you want to blend in also, so you will also fold your pants on the bottom on Fridays so you won't be excluded. Belief perseverance versus confirmation bias. These are both barriers involved in making decisions. Belief perseverance says that you will continue to believe your view even when there's contrary evidence. So let's say that you think vaccines don't work, and somebody presents you with a study that says vaccines do work, and then you continue to believe, no, they don't, even though you did get this study that says, look, here are these results. Confirmation bias is similar in that you tend to have a point of view, but you are only looking for information that supports your point of view. So if you believed that about vaccines, then if you went to actively search for articles that supported your view that vaccines don't work, and only for that type of article, that would be confirmation bias. Central and peripheral routes to persuasion when trying to encourage others to make a decision. When you use a central route to persuasion, you're basing your information on logic. So for example, when describing a university to choose, the person will be swayed or persuaded by things like the cost of tuition, the amount of scholarships, the opportunities based on their major, how far it is. Those are all logical things. Peripheral route to persuasion maybe other things that are kind of like spur of the moment or peripheral, like things that you think of to the side, but they're not the key details. Like they have a national championship basketball team for that university. The dorm rooms are painted a pretty color. The campus is a little bit prettier. Those are peripheral route things. Internal locus of control versus external locus of control. This goes with believing if you have an internal factor that supports or benefits you. So, for example, if you believe that your schoolwork success is due to your hard work and the time you spend studying and your natural intelligence, then you believe that's an internal locus of control. External locus of control is if you believe no matter what you do, it's up to the teacher to decide how successful you are. It's up to the school board. It's up to fate. None of those are things that you have control over. That would be an external locus of control. And remember that we've learned that external locus of control is linked more to depression. Foot in the door technique versus door in the face. Foot in the door is where you start small and then build up in your request. A salesman at the door says, "Can I just have 5 minutes of your time?" And before you know it, you're donating $100 to their charity. Door in the face is where they start with, "Sir, can you give me $200 for my charity?" And they are ready to slam the door in your face. And then you say, no, wait, how about $20? And that sounds more reasonable compared to the original 200. So you go along with that. De-individuation versus social loafing. De-individuation is where in a group setting, a person loses their individual identity, so they feel like they blend in more. This can be good in situations like prom, and everybody's on the dance floor having a good time. You don't feel like you'll be seen specifically if you blend in with the dancing group, so you're more likely to get out there and dance. Negative in case of a riot. Everybody else is going out and doing something they probably normally wouldn't do, trying to riot and running down the street and throwing bricks and starting fires, and an individual loses their identity and joins in that mob riot, and they do something that they wouldn't have otherwise. Social loafing has to do with a group situation that says the more people there are in a group, the less likely a person is to carry the burden, and it's part of that diffusion of responsibility. Diffusion of responsibility says that the more people there are present in a group, the less a person feels individually responsible to act. So in the case of emergencies, or not even emergencies, just something happens, the bystander effect says that the more people that are around, the less likely a person is to act. So for example, if somebody passes out on the street and there's 20 people around, everybody may hesitate for a minute because they assume somebody else will step up and help. Whereas if you were the only person there, you would be more likely to act immediately. The mere exposure effect says that the more times that you are exposed or introduced or seen, you see something, the more likely you are to like it. So for example, a lot of advertising works this way. You see a product multiple times, you see a commercial multiple times, you're more likely to want to try it. Social trap versus superordinate goals. A social trap is when somebody does something that benefits them individually, but it hurts the group as a whole. The example for this is overfishing. If one fishing boat goes out and gets a ton of fish, more than what they're legally allowed to, it benefits them. They'll have more fish to sell, but it hurts everybody else, and even that person in the long run, because now those fish aren't there to breed and make more fish. Superordinate goals are when you have two rival groups and they don't like each other, but then they have one common bigger goal. The example commonly used for this was after 9/11, Republicans and Democrats did not like each other, but they came together in order to fight against worldwide terrorism. The reciprocity norm versus altruism. Altruism in general just means a willingness to help others. The reciprocity norm says that if somebody helps you, you are willing to reciprocate and help them. If somebody helps you move out of an apartment, then when they move later on, you're more likely to be willing to help them move as well. Social facilitation versus social inhibition. This is if you perform better or worse in front of a group. Social facilitation says, especially if the task is easy, then in front of a larger group, you will perform better. Social inhibition says that in front of a group, especially if it's a more complex task, you will do worse. Group polarization versus group think. Groupthink says that if people have different views and they get together with other people with those same views, they're more likely to separate further. So, for example, at political rallies, somebody may be a fan of a candidate, but they just kind of liked them. But when they get there, they hear that candidate speak, they're around other people who like that candidate, and now they become even more for that candidate and even more against their opposing candidate. Groupthink is when you have a small group and they are isolated and they're having to make a decision, usually in a hurry. And that groupthink leads to a poor decision because they were hurried. Sometimes they had a dominant group member. They didn't hear outside opinions, and they were just isolated. The Bay of Pigs example was our one for that. Unit 5 was all the mental and physical health stuff. Cognitive therapy techniques versus psychodynamic. Remember, psychodynamic is based off Freud's ideas of the unconscious mind. It focuses mainly on reaching into the past childhood experiences and just free association and talking. Cognitive therapy techniques work on changing maladaptive thinking patterns. Generalized anxiety disorder versus agoraphobia. Agoraphobia is a very specific phobia, literally means fear to go to market, so it's fear of public places. Generalized anxiety disorder is characterized by extreme worry, but it's all the time and not to any specific cause. Rational emotive therapy versus ECT. Rational emotive therapy is a type of cognitive therapy where you refute a person's irrational beliefs, like believing that they will never be perfect or they have to be perfect all the time. Like perfection is not attainable, but instead you can be successful. ECT stands for electroconvulsive therapy. Those are shock treatments, and those are used for depression that does not respond to medication. An anxiety hierarchy versus systematic desensitization. Those are both used as types of cognitive therapy in treating phobias. The anxiety hierarchy is where they list, like kind of on a point scale, what is the most scary and the least scariest thing. So least scariest would be seeing a picture of a spider. Most scary on the hierarchy would be letting a spider crawl up my arm. So systematic desensitization says you go through these steps in the anxiety hierarchy, sometimes it's called a fear hierarchy, and while you're being exposed to those, you practice relaxation techniques like deep breathing, listening to calming music. Autism spectrum disorder versus ADHD. Those are both developmental disorders, which means they're usually identified early on in childhood. With ADHD, a person struggles with being impulsive, inability to sit still. Autism spectrum disorder, main characteristics are difficulties with social interaction, eye contact, some physical sensitivities. Major depressive disorder versus bipolar disorder. Major depressive disorder, we know, is severe low feelings, can affect weight, can affect sleep patterns. Bipolar disorder, we know, revolves between the manic episodes and the depressed episodes. Both major depressive disorder linked to low serotonin levels and treated with SSRIs, bipolar disorder treated with lithium. Schizophrenia versus dissociative identity disorder. Schizophrenia's hallmark characteristic, the main symptoms for schizophrenia are the scattered thoughts, and then other accompanying symptoms include hallucinations, delusions, sometimes some motor interruptions, word salad, and all of that is linked to high levels of dopamine. Dissociative identity disorders, what used to be called split personalities, and that's when a person had severe trauma and it causes their mind to separate. Sometimes that's associated with a dissociative fugue and dissociative amnesia. Hallucinations versus delusions. Hallucinations are false perceptions. So that would be things like hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there, touch sensations that are not real. Delusions are false beliefs. Common ones are delusions of paranoia, believing that someone's after you. Delusions of grandeur, believing you're somebody important, like you are God or you work for the FBI. Both are common symptoms of schizophrenia. Lithium and SSRIs are types of psychoactive medications. Lithium is used to treat bipolar disorder, and SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, are used to treat depression and sometimes anxiety as well. Antisocial and avoidant personality disorders. Antisocial is the one that we've associated with serial killers, but not everybody who has it is a serial killer. But with that one, there is a severe lack of empathy. They cannot seem to feel emotions. They have no regard for the rights of others, major disregard for rules. Avoidant personality disorder is the one where the person is painfully shy. They avoid social interactions because of a fear of rejection or being humiliated. Humanistic versus biological perspectives on treatment. Biological perspective believes that treatment can be done by altering things in the body, so basically medication and surgeries. Humanistic is believing that every person can reach their full potential, so that involves showing unconditional positive regard. It involves active listening and helping people to reach their full potential. Problem-focused coping versus emotion-focused coping. This was in our stress section. Problem-focused coping is where you're actually dealing with the problem. So maybe you have a car that constantly breaks down. So problem-focused coping would be saving up the money to try to get the repairs or get a new car. Emotion-focused coping would be calling your friend and venting how frustrated you are that your car keeps breaking and that you're having to struggle in saving up money. Narcissistic personality disorder versus histrionic. Narcissistic is very self-centered. They believe that they are very important. They expect special treatment from others. They do not always vocalize this. They may feel these things internally, but may not say them out loud. Histrionic is very outspoken, very self-centered also, but it's very loud, very look at me, very loud with their emotions, sometimes loud with their dressing, sometimes very sexualized, all again to get attention for themselves. Obsessions versus compulsions. Obsessions are uncontrollable thoughts and repetitive thoughts. And then compulsions are uncontrollable repetitive behaviors, usually used to satisfy the obsessions. OCD versus OCPD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is a type of anxiety disorder that includes the uncontrollable obsessions and compulsions. Usually involves a very specific ritual or routine that they have to follow those behaviors, otherwise they cannot stop thinking about it. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder is more of like a perfectionist. They want to follow the rules. There's a very specific way that things should be done, but they don't have the level of anxiety related to it. The schizophrenia dopamine hypothesis says that the primary cause of schizophrenia is overactive dopamine receptors, and one of the main evidence for this is the success of antipsychotic medications that block dopamine. The diathesis stress model is not specific to schizophrenia, but it does definitely apply to schizophrenia. It's the idea that a person may have a genetic predisposition, that's the diathesis, for a disorder, but it is environmental factors such as stress that actually can bring out the symptoms of the disorder. Humanistic therapy techniques, that one I already kind of covered that, but that's again for when people can reach their full potential. Dependent personality disorder versus paranoid. Dependent is the one where they're extremely clingy. They cannot make decisions for themselves. They would rather be around other people and do things for them so that they don't have to make decisions for themselves. Paranoid personality disorder can seem like paranoid schizophrenia, but it does not involve the true hallucinations and delusions, but feeling that people are talking about them, worried that others don't like them, but general paranoia. Medications for generalized anxiety disorder, they take sometimes the SSRIs, but also anti-anxiety medicines like Valium. Bipolar disorder takes lithium. Depression is taking the SSRIs, including Lexapro and what's the first one? I can't think of the name right now. Paxil, there's another one, I can't think of it. And then schizophrenia takes antipsychotics like Thorazine. You don't have to remember the actual names of all the medications though. All right, that's your Unit 4b and 5 test review.